pleasure to welcome everyone to the first of our summer 2021 alumni webinar series. Today is number 1 of 7 webinars, which will happen at this time each Thursday over the course of the summer. My name is Kendall Gray. I'm the Changemaker Collaborative Program Assistant at the UNH Sustainability Institute. I support our student-facing programming, including but not limited to the Sustainability Fellowship, of which this webinar series is a part of. Being part of the staff team for this program and helping organize the alumni webinar series has a special significance for me. I'm a member of UNH's class of 2020. During my 4 years at UNH as a student, I was very connected to sustainability. I majored in environmental conservation and sustainability and worked as an intern at the UNH Sustainability Institute, helping organize our Sustainability Advocates program. Also in 2019, I served as a Sustainability Fellow for the UNH Energy Task Force, researching high performance building standards and internal carbon pricing as carbon reduction tools for the university in light of UNH's third installment of its climate action plan, fittingly called Wildcat. We are so pleased to welcome you to the first webinar of the summer. The webinar series is a key program element of our Sustainability Fellows, a paid summer program that connects high-achieving undergraduate and graduate students to regional organizations to work on real-world sustainability initiatives. Our goal for this webinar series is to provide valuable insight into the field of sustainability for our current fellows, help them build the professional networks, connect with program alumni, ultimately helping them navigate their career options. We are so pleased to be joined today by some other groups, students in UNH's Changemaker Fellows program, our cohort-based program which connects students interested in sustainability from their freshman year through their senior year with like-minded peers and faculty staff support. We are also joined by the 2021 Extension Fellows who are housed within UNH's Cooperative Extension Division, so we welcome all these groups. We are really looking forward to catching up with our alumni and partner organizations to hear about the great work they're involved in. Without further ado, I would like to announce our moderator for this session. Katie is a systems thinker who connects communities, organizations, individuals to set and achieve audacious goals to improve quality of life. She is a sustainability lead at the Collaboratory, a community foundation serving Southwest Florida. Beyond her current role at the Collaboratory, she's an adjunct faculty member at Florida Gulf Coast University, where she previously served as the institution's sustainability officer. Within this role, Katie teaches University Colloquium, A Sustainable Future, as well as Foundations of Civic Engagement. And she has recently accepted a position of Director of Corporate Social Responsibility at Hertz. So congrats, Katie. In 2013, Katie earned her master's from Chatham University's Falk School of Sustainability. Additionally, she's an alum of the UNH Sustainability Fellows program in 2013, when she completed a charting emissions for food service chefs project. Within this role, Katie worked with 8 different Aramark dining halls across the East Coast, including James Madison universities, to recommend ways to decrease carbon emissions from food purchasing and develop marketing plans to increase demand for environmental sound and healthier food choices. So throughout the webinar, feel free to chat some questions, and we'll have an opportunity at the end for a guided student Q&A. And we also would love to see your faces. So if you could turn your cameras on and keep yourselves muted until prompted, that would be great. So take it away, Katie.
Thank you so much, Kendall, and thank you everyone for your time today. I'm so excited to connect with each of you. It's such an exciting summer that you have ahead of you. It's really going to help launch you into finding your passion and purpose and really achieving your career goals. So really grateful to be able to connect with all of you this way. Thanks for the great introduction. A little bit, just to tell you a little bit more about what I do as a sustainability and impact professional for a community foundation. under the banner of community organizing and activism. We at Collaboratory, we actually just changed our name. We used to be the Southwest Florida Community Foundation. And we're not just changing our name, we're trying to change the name of the game, so to speak, because community foundations are historically kind of like old school transactional organizations where people with high net worths can kind of find tax shelter. And we're really interested in, I love Natalie's picture, that we're really interested in sustainable development goals and how do community foundations become a lever for realizing sustainable development goals. So community foundations are networked across the globe and they typically serve geographic regions. And so my work encompasses trying to really change the way that we engage our donors, change the way that we integrate sustainability into our business practices, change the way that we coordinate and convene different partners around sustainable development goals, because all of those issues are so big that no single entity or person or company on their own could possibly move the needle on them. So it really takes collaboration, hence why we are now Collaboratory. And we see ourselves being like this kind of like NASA-like coordinating structure, right? So NASA made it possible for humanity to get to the moon. But NASA, they did that by work. They didn't build the spacesuits, right? Playtex built the spacesuits. So they were just that coordinating entity. So we're trying to really get into that space and it's really exciting. Really love it. And I'm really excited to be taking on my new role in a corporate capacity. I've worked previously in higher education, now in philanthropy and now for corporate social responsibility. So I'm really excited to I think when you're, going through your career, it's really important to try on a bunch of different hats and figure out where you fit most and where you can make the biggest impact. So I'm just looking forward to that. But that's enough about me. Let's start hearing from our wonderful panelists today. So I'm just going to kind of go round robin style and we'll ask a few questions. And then fellows, if you think of questions as anyone speaking, feel free to type them in the chat and then I'll ask them a few round robin style questions and then I'll call on you to ask your questions. We'll have plenty of time for that. So if you don't want to forget about what you're thinking, feel free to just pop it in the chat so that you don't lose that thought. All right. So Natalie, let's start with you. Tell us a little bit about your current professional role and a little bit about your background. What did you study? When did you graduate? All the basics. Let's just do a little introductory round.
Okay, great. So my name is Natalie. My pronouns are she, her. I live currently in Cleveland, Ohio. I studied at the University of Arizona throughout all of my education. And I have a BS in environmental science, a BA in philosophy, politics, economics, and law. And then I was doing a master's in development practice, which is like international sustainable development. And then I took the fellowship position. Just like my education, my career is also complicated. I tend to go after things that are fun to me, and that makes it very challenging. So I guess I would say I'm a consultant at this point, but I work for like a solar company and do marketing for them for like real money. For my not money job, I'm the executive director of Care About Climate. And then I also have a couple other hats. I am the international liaison for the U.S. Climate Action Network to Climate Action Network International, and do a bunch of work with like how do we bridge local action and international policy and make connections to like how climate impacts are actually affecting people on the ground. So that's complicated and not an easy answer, but I think that's like the basic introduction for who I am and what I'm doing. So yeah, thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. And I think that fits what, I think a lot of us in our careers, in our civic and our professional lives, will all wear a lot of hats. If you're interested in making a difference in this world, you're going to be like Natalie and you're going to have to put on different hats and do what you got to do to make it work, to make an impact. So that's great. Shannon, what about you? Tell us a little bit about your current professional role and where you graduated from, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, it's really exciting to see everybody. It's so funny now everyone's using Zoom, but I remember we used it at UNHSI long before the pandemic to connect. But my name is Shannon Siegel. I use she, her pronouns. I'm based in Somerville, Massachusetts. I studied at Mount Holyoke College, which is in Western Massachusetts, where I got a degree in environmental studies and Spanish. In 2019, I did my UNH fellowship in 2018, where I worked at the New England Grassroots Environment Fund doing some really interesting and innovative democratic grant making work. Currently, I'm the organizing director at the Environmental Voter Project. In one line, what we do is that we get folks who are really strong environmentalists and we get them voting in every single election across the whole country. So I work with our volunteers to make that work happen. So I will keep it brief there, but I'm excited to talk to y'all more about it.
Fun fact, I volunteered and Shannon trained me, and it's a great organization. If you're looking for something to do to really make an impact, I highly recommend it. All right, Alex, how about you? Tell us a little bit about your current professional role and when you graduated and what you're up to.
Yeah, hey, thanks for having me. My name is Alex. I use he, him pronouns. I am based in Dover, New Hampshire. I went to the University of New Hampshire. I graduated in 2013. When I was at UNH, my friends and I started a project, a student-run and move-out project. So we collected all the stuff that students otherwise would have discarded, stored all of that stuff over the summer, held a yard sale during move-in weekend, and sold everything back to students at discounted prices. We started that program in 2010, and at the time, that was the first program of its kind in the country that was entirely run by students and also self-sustaining. And so there, you may be familiar with other campus programs similar to that. That was the first one that kind of had that particular focus. We heard a lot from other campuses in the years that followed, looking for guidance and support in starting similar programs. And as I headed towards graduation, I was working on the side with about 5 campuses to help them start those same programs. So upon graduation, we kicked off a nonprofit called PLAN, the Post Landfill Action Network. Our first 2 years, we specifically focused on replicating that model. So we went from 9 campuses to 40 campuses, helping them all kick off student-run, self-sustaining move-out projects. In the years that followed, we had the opportunity to meet with campuses, tour facilities, learn a lot about campus-wide zero waste initiatives, and began to learn about this. A lot of what happens on campuses is they're kind of replicating best practices and reinventing the wheel. So there's not a lot of information sharing. And so PLAN started to develop the infrastructure for a nationwide network of information sharing and best practices guidance. And we now advise over 700 campuses across the country on about 15 different programs. So electronic waste recycling, composting initiatives, eliminating disposable plastics, setting up campus-wide surplus property systems. If you can think about it related to waste on a campus, we deal with it. We have 11 full-time staff. We are scattered kind of all over the US. I'm the only one left in New Hampshire. We run an annual Students for Zero Waste conference, a lot of other initiatives, pledges to get campuses to eliminate disposable plastics, all kinds of stuff. Me personally, I sat in the co-executive director role for a number of years. 2 years ago, I started the process of stepping out of that role. And I've been very fortunate to be able to stay with the organization. I am a full-time staff member, no longer in the executive position, which I kind of love. It's really fun to not have to do grant writing and donor development and to be able to actually do the work that I love. And there's also a lot to be said about the value of white men in positions of power stepping down and creating space for new leadership. So I'm happy to talk about that. Do you have any questions about that? Yes, former fellow has been hired full-time into our team. Over the last 8 years, I have advised a dozen plus interns and fellows through Fiona and Chen's programs at UNH. Yeah, really happy to be here.
Awesome, thank you. I love the way you described the way that you were able to pilot, scale, and replicate something that turned into something that I think every college campus sustainability coordinator across the country and facilities person across the country, and maybe even beyond, uses as a resource. So that's really, really impactful and great work. So are we just going to keep going around the circle? Natalie, our next question for the round robin style is, tell us a little bit about how the work that you do fits under the banner of community organizing and activism, And also, really, what about your work really gets you excited to get out of bed every day?
Great. So I would say I'm going to answer the second question first because it's easier. I really love working with the people that I work with. I get to work with people from around the world, and it's really exciting and fun. I would say where I land on community activism and organizing, I just think it's like a core piece of like making sure, as I was saying, I like bridging the local to global sort of stuff. And the like making sure we're working with communities is like the key to that. And so a lot of my work has focused on like how do we get grassroots groups or people who are in more marginalized spaces and spaces of power, and thinking about how we elevate different voices. So thinking a lot about like youth specifically, youth in the global South, and then also communities of color in the US. And so I am very privileged in where I sit. And so like, in addition, like one thing I didn't mention, but I also sit on the board of directors for Sierra Club. So, and my organization is recognized by the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. So we go to those conferences. So, and we're in a bunch of networks that give us high level access to like governmental officials and stuff like that. So like what I try to do is get young people who are around the world who are either working on projects or want to work on projects, have them do that, and then figure out how to get their voices directly into the rooms where critical conversations are happening. And so we are in a process of developing those young people to learn the skills that they need in order to actually do like the projects on the ground, which can be anything from like anti-plastic work to anti-fracking work. And then be able to like have them speak to senators or the State Department or their governmental entities, whatever it looks like in their country, and be able to advocate for certain things. And so that's what I really like, is really trying to figure out that kind of strategy to move kind of everyone forward in a place where we need to go. Yeah.
That's awesome. When I was working at the university as their sustainability coordinator, almost all of the students that were really, really the strongest leaders had gone through the Sierra Club Sprague program. And so that's another just really, that program has touched so many people in so many ways and has really made a difference through, student activism and leadership. So thank you for that work. Shannon, what about you? What makes you excited to get out of bed every day? And how does your work fit under the banner of community organizing and activism?
Yeah, I would say I'll follow Natalie's lead and lead with what gets you excited about it and then kind of the why. I would say what gets me excited to do my job is that I just feel like it matters. Like I feel like it makes a difference. And I think it's hard not to overstate that. I think, at least for the type of person that I am, I'd have a hard time doing work that I don't, at least at the core, feel like is making some type of difference. So I love that I can get paid to do that for 40 hours a week, or more than that. And I would say, in terms of the community activism and organizing, when I stepped into this role as organizing director, you're like, oh, you're an organizer. The secret of the trade is that no one really knows what an organizer is or does. It's like a very broad category of organizing. It looks really different in different places. So part of what my job is defining what organizing looks like in this capacity. I had done fossil fuel divestment organizing, climate justice organizing on campus as a student. And my job is currently super different from that. I would say primarily in the sense of, okay, what is the community you're working with? If you're on a campus, it's pretty straightforward to identify this is my community. Currently, I'm at a national nonprofit. We have volunteers across the country. I don't see them face to face. I don't talk to them every day. So one of the main ways that I think my job as an organizer is to create that community with this disparate, distributed group of people. And in this case, our community is people that want to make a difference in the electorate. We want to see more environmental change on the national level and at the local level. So I get to bring these activists who have expertise in their local areas or expertise in a particular type of work and bring us all together virtually, even pre-pandemic, to be able to make this change together and rally like, okay, Portland, Maine has an election coming up next week. Like, let's get volunteers from all over to contact voters in Portland. Okay, now it's time for Texas Congressional District 6. Let's get everyone in there. So I think as an organizer at a national organization, creating that community and bringing those activists together is one of the most exciting and also really challenging pieces of what I do.
Great. And one thing I love about the organization is how data driven it is. If you want to volunteer with them, you'll be able to see the impact that the work is making, because they keep track of all of it and they know exactly who to target and how to get people to turn out to vote. So it's really great work. Alex, what about you? What makes you excited to get out of bed every day, and how does your work tie under the banner of community organizing and activism?
Yeah, so I have a few different thoughts about this. There's a really great book that I'd recommend if you're getting into organizing and activism called Beautiful Trouble. And it's a kind of summary of different theories of change and organizing strategies and tactics and things like that, pulling from real examples of different campaigns and organizations over the last 50, 60 years. And one of the theories in there is called points of intervention theory. And that is Plan's theory of change. We've fully adopted that as our theory of change. We have that listed on our website. We've created graphics around it. The idea of the points of intervention theory is that systems are incredibly large and unchangeable with just one singular action. So for us, the system we are addressing is the linear consumption economy. We extract resources to make disposable products. We produce them at massive rates. We distribute them across the world very quickly. We consume them very quickly. We dispose of them very quickly. And then we go back to square one to extract more resources. An ever growing, very unsustainable system. To fix that system, there's too much for one person to do, right? And so I think a big challenge in activism and organizing, especially when you're first getting into it, is feeling incredibly overwhelmed by the breadth of problems in the world and very unclear about where to actually start, and feeling like, you can't do it all, et cetera. So it's really important to ground yourself in the idea that no one can do everything, but everyone can do something, and that like together, all of those actions make change. And so for individuals, it's identifying your point of intervention, or for groups, or for organizations, or for whatever. So a point of intervention could be locking yourself to a pipeline build, right? A point of intervention could be, resisting a landfill in your local community, or a point of intervention could be building a reuse program on your college campus, right? Like there's hundreds and hundreds of intervention points within the linear system that we're describing. And so for us, part of the approach in working with students is helping them understand power, and helping them understand how to get involved, and helping them understand where they fit in, and feeling really good about, if I want to work on organic farming, or if I want to work on pipeline resistance, or if I want to work on renewable energy in my community, like that is okay, because like I am working really hard on that one thing, and I can feel good about the fact that I'm part of an ecosystem of people also working really hard on the thing that they're passionate about and they have skills to be able to work on. So that's one thing. And the other is that for me personally, my point of intervention is navigating bureaucratic power dynamics within a college campus and figuring out how to like fix systems on a college campus. So part of it is helping students, feel good about and find their place in their work in the system. And then for me personally, I am really enjoying the opportunity to analyze college campus bureaucratic systems and how to help students navigate those systems.
That's great. It makes me think of like, bureaucracy comes from the word bureau. It's like a chest of drawers. You can't open one. When you open the bottom drawer, the top drawer doesn't know about it, and it's by design, right? So that's really good work to be able to, like you said, map it, understand where power dynamics are, understand different strategies to, disrupt business as usual scenarios that are unsustainable and that need to be disrupted. Very cool. All right, my next question for you is just to tell us, and Alex, you touched on this a little bit earlier, but I want to make sure that Natalie and Shannon tell us a bit more about their journeys. So tell us a little bit about how you got into this work and what your journey has been like, and also what's your advice for students who are going to be embarking on their fellowship this summer and or graduating soon. So Natalie, over to you.
Yeah, my journey has been strange, but also really fun. I started to care about climate when I was in graduate school, as I said, like a year before I went into the fellowship. And so the reason I started it is because I went to these UN climate change conferences with the Sierra Club. And Sierra Club is very domestic focused, if you don't know that. And I am very interested in like building international bridges in order to create change and create like a movement. And so I started it not really knowing what I was doing. It was funny listening to Alex talk about like donor relations and all the executive stuff, because that's not, I was thinking I was going to do all the work, but I do a lot of administration and it's pretty exciting. So starting my own organization was like just totally, it put me in like a business world. I learned how to do accounting. I learned how to do all this other stuff. As I was doing that and trying to figure out how to like bring in all these people to work on these international campaigns, I also needed to like make a living. And so I worked for a solar company for a while in their sales department, and I do marketing now for them. I have done a couple of different consultants degrees or like contracts, and as I was mentioning, and so and it's been really where I've moved to. I also have a partner who was going to medical school, and if you know anything about that world, you basically go wherever the papers tell you to go. So I'm actually from Arizona. I moved to Montana for my fellowship, and then I moved to St. Louis to be with him, and now I'm in Cleveland, Ohio. So this has also been a way to like give me continuity throughout all that work, is just like being grounded to this like weird international community. And so I guess like my theory has been just like take every opportunity possible, try to be really deeply rooted and connected with the relationships that you're building, and building friendships through that. And that's kind of where I've been. It's just like things just pop up and I'm like, that sounds fun, and then take it and see where the next thing goes. Yeah, so a little sporadic, but that's kind of where my life has been.
I think it's really empowering though to hear that. I think it's not like, when you're a young kid, people are like, well, what do you want to do when you grow up? And it's not really, I think like you're constantly going to be, all of you will be asking yourself that question, like all the time over and over again. Like you might think that it's going to stop after you get your first job. I promise you it doesn't stop. It just keeps going. So just get good at it, get used to it, and keep challenging yourself and pushing yourself. And that's a really good example of how it's, the road just kind of comes up in front of you and you got to adapt and address it, and, take opportunities when they come. And like you said, keep those relationships and networks. Shannon, what about you? Tell us about your journey to get to where you were and your advice for students graduating or embarking on their summer program.
Totally. I just like in Katie's intro, I would say I'm also a systems thinker. I care about probably every issue under the sun in some capacity, but like what Alex was saying, you have to focus your energy somewhere. And I felt like sustainability, climate change felt like a really overarching umbrella issue, which I probably don't need to explain to anybody here. But I said, okay, if I care about immigration rights, and if I care about like gender inclusivity and racial justice, I feel like I can get at all of that by doing work around climate and environmental justice. So that's how I got into this general field, is I said, I feel like if we can get this under control, we can accomplish a lot of the other things that I also care about. So with that, I knew and continued to reaffirm that my strengths were not in the natural sciences. It's important work and it's not for me. So I was really interested in the areas of study in the fields of work where I could do work that's grounded in like fixing climate change and working on environmental justice on the political side of things. So, okay, how can I take this amazing information that the scientists put together? I trust that information. How can I like implement the solutions? So I did a whole different bunch of things when I was in college. I did different internships where I got to try out a few different things. And oddly enough, my internship after my first year in undergrad was at the Environmental Voter Project. I was, 18. I didn't really know what I was doing, but I took it. It was close to home. I had a lot of fun. I stayed in touch with my supervisors there. Again, did different things. And I love to share this. After I graduated undergrad, I applied to a job at EVP and I got all the way along and didn't get it. They hired somebody else and that was fine, right? But a few months later, they called me up. They said, we have another opening and we'd love to give it to you if you want it. So my advice on there is you're going to be super qualified for things that you're probably not going to get. Don't take it personally. There's a lot of super qualified people out there, but stay in touch with folks. My current coworker says to me, he's like, your first week as an intern, I asked you to like copy edit something and you tore it to shreds and you made it so much better. But I don't know how you had the courage to like rip this document to shreds that I sent you in your first week. So that's to say, like, speak up, have your opinions heard, don't be nervous. Like, these are your chances to make your professional connections that, unbeknownst to you, like could really pay dividends in a month or in 4 or 5 years. So that's how I got into it, and that's how I'm staying into it.
Thank you. I agree. I've had similar things. I think I have a long list of rejection letters. So it's kind of just goes with the territory. So you're right, Shannon. It doesn't mean you're not smart. It doesn't mean you're not qualified. It just means that it wasn't the path for you, and that another, one door opens and one door closes and another one opens. So it all worked out. Alex, I know you talked a little bit already about your career path, but maybe tell us about your advice for students, or if you want to say anything else about your career journey too, that would be great.
Yeah, for sure. Keeping it short and sweet. My general advice is to put a lot of energy into networking, especially now when you're a student, when you have the opportunity to be with really cool professors, or the folks that you are interning with or whatever. The work that I do and the work that it took to kind of build an organization from the ground up, to fundraise, to understand partnerships, to understand the legal requirements of establishing a nonprofit, to build my board, to the list kind of goes on and on. Understanding corporate sponsorship, understanding so many things about starting an organization and navigating grant writing and all of these different pieces are all a result of networking. It was being willing to be kind of humble and being willing to be like, hey, I've got this idea, or I'm struggling with what I want to do with my life, and these are the directions and the things that I'm interested in. I'm wondering if you'd be willing to grab coffee and if I can just ask you a couple questions. For me, the opportunity to just endlessly build my network and be humble and ask those questions has led to this pretty extensive network of folks that support me and support the organization and have made this whole thing possible. So this is the opportunity that you have right now to really kind of like, hone in on some of those key mentors and people who you can work with for the rest of your life. So my recommendation would be, whether you feel ready to or have a particular thing to ask about or not, don't feel weird about reaching out to people who are in a mentorship position to you right now and being like, hey, I'm wondering if I can have a one-on-one, and start building that relationship, because those folks really matter 5, 10, 20 years from now as well.
I think that's great advice. I think I still ask people for informational interviews personally, because it's really informative to hear from people and hear what they do. And it's so insightful. It's one of the best ways to learn about what their days are like. And like Shannon said, you want to make sure that you're if this is your time for self-reflection and to explore and figure out what you're good at and how you can spend your time doing what you're good at and playing to your strengths, and then having that network so you know who to call when something's outside of your scope of expertise. That's what it's all about, instead of fake it till you make it, maybe instead think, if you don't know, just say so, right? Like, it's okay. So that was a really great round robin session. I want to open it up to all of you to ask questions. I see that Alexandra asked a question to Shannon. Alexandra, do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Sure. Shannon, I loved what you said about, I love the natural sciences. That's not necessarily where you wanted to actually be working. You still wanted to work with people and with communities. So I'm just wondering how you still stay connected with, the knowledge base of the natural sciences and bring that into your work with communities.
Totally. I would say that first off, any time that you're doing this type of sustainability environmental work, I think it's really important to be literate in the science and to be able to understand, like, what does it mean when they say we can't have 2 degrees of warming? Like, what does all of this mean? I don't necessarily know or remember how to do the work and to do the calculations, but you're often going to get questions from folks that are like, how is what you're doing affecting X thing? How is what you're doing affecting Y? I don't believe you on Z. So if you're able to understand that information and communicate it to folks, even if my day-to-day work has nothing to do with 2 degrees of warming, in this field, you really should know that type of information, generally speaking, which I'm sure you do now if you're in this position. And I would say, speaking even a little bit more just in the hard sciences in general, as Katie mentioned, at EVP, we're very statistically rigorous in our work, which is pretty unique for this type of organization. So we run randomized control trials. We can tell you with specificity the percent of fraction of a percentage point of an impact that we had. So that's something that's important for me. Again, I'm not doing the calculations, but people ask me questions about them. And most importantly, it helps me know that the work that I'm doing is making an impact. You cannot quantify every type of impact, but I think it's important to always check yourself. Like, I feel like what I'm doing is working, or I feel like what I'm doing is the right thing. To the extent that you can check that and prove it, the better you're going to be at your work. Because I can have all the assumptions in the world about what messaging is going to work, or the methods that are going to work. But sometimes you just are wrong, or sometimes the weirdest things that you can't explain will work. And the way to know is to test it and to have the data. I'm not pulling out information as the organizer, but I ask for it, I look at it, and I can communicate it to other people.
Thank you. I love that you applied science in 2 ways there, because you're talking not only about understanding the science that informs, what you're speaking with people about, but also the science of your own work. So that's really cool. Thank you.
Yeah. And I love to, I think that, there's always that tension you have to hold between specialization and generalist. So I think if you go the sustainability professional route, you kind of have to be generalist who knows, a little bit about a lot of different things and how they intersect and interconnect. And it's really a continual learning process. What other questions do all of you have? Feel free to type them in the chat or raise your hand and unmute yourself. I see Mikey has his hand raised. Go ahead and unmute yourself. I'll do Mikey, then Cathy.
Hi to everybody. I guess my question is what's one skill you didn't have until you got into the field and it kind of hit you like a freight train, like, oh, I'm going to need to know how to do this, like school didn't prepare you for it? Like, I know it's kind of different for everybody, but I'm just kind of curious.
I guess I can jump in. I would probably say business and organizational management and finances were things that I just didn't know that I needed to know. I was super focused on the sustainability and figuring out how that all works, so that I didn't really think about all this, how an organization actually functions and operates. And I spend most of my time thinking about that now. So it also depends what you want to do. I can't speak for Shannon, so hopefully Shannon will follow up, but I don't think that role has as much to do with thinking about oh, what are the legal risks when you try to send minors to other countries and all this other stuff. But that was something that I definitely came up with that I had just no idea, and I just had to learn quickly. So yeah.
I saw Alex shaking his head too. Do you want to weigh in?
Yeah, I would echo the business. Fiona knows. I was a double major in political science and philosophy, so I did not have a background in the environmental studies. Started a nonprofit that does work in environmental work, and also didn't know how to start an organization or the business side of the things at all. Feel really fortunate to have worked with some really fantastic advisors like Fiona, and there's great resources out there. Like I was able to work with the Small Business Development Center, which their entire job is to help people start businesses. So there's the networking thing. Like there's lots of people out there who can help you with this stuff. The other thing that I would add to this is, as a society, both for a long time and also I think especially right now, there is a lot of conversations happening within internal organizations around culture, and there's not a lot being discussed in an academic space around that. But decision making, hierarchical management, diversity, equity, and inclusion. There's very few, if any, classes that will teach you organizational management from the perspective of a DEI lens, as well as what is equitable decision making, what is the right structure, how do you handle staff management, how do you handle feedback systems, communication, things like that, and that's definitely the kind of educational thing that needs to happen outside of, I think, an academic environment. There's lots of great organizations out there. There's resources, there's workshops. I would highly recommend AORTA, AORTA, as a nonprofit organization that does workshops regularly on that. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, Cathy, I saw your hand go up next, so go ahead and ask your question.
Sure. So thinking about this topic of community organizing, each of you kind of have your different type of community that each have a different people with different backgrounds on environmental issues. So I was wondering, where do you start or figure out where to start in getting people on board to what you're working on?
Who wants to tackle this one?
I can jump in. That's a really interesting question, particularly since I think if I'm thinking of my community as environmental voter project volunteers, some of them would say that climate is their most important driving force. And many of them would say, I'm a progressive and I care about progressive issues, and this is a way for me to work with one of the many progressive issues. So I think one of the most important things is finding that common touch point. So know your audience, know the types of things that people care about. But if I'm trying to do this big national recruitment push, I'm probably not going to actually talk too much about climate change in the environment. I'm going to talk about how if we can get climate first voters to vote, then we're going to get really excellent progressive leaders into office. Think about what is that middle point that everyone can agree on and organize around that. So your messaging can really shift depending on who you're trying to talk with or organize with, but think about the intersections of the work that you're doing and rally around that.
Natalie, Alex, do you have anything to add, or do you want me to take the next question? Seeing that you're on mute, not muting yourself, I'm going to take the next question. So I think it looks like Maggie can go next. Go ahead, Maggie, unmute yourself.
Great, thanks. As you all were speaking, I was kind of noticing, talking about how you've gotten into this work because you want to make a difference, really doing something that you love. And I think that's something that we probably all on this call have in common. But I was just reading this book about burnout culture and how doing something that you love can really lead to being overworked, undervalued, underpaid. And so I'm curious kind of how, if you've experienced that, and strategies you have to deal with that.
Great question. Who wants to tackle that first?
I guess I can start because I deal with this every day. And I actually don't have I have some suggestions and I'm not good at following it, I guess. So like I started the organization when I was 23 and now I'm 30. It's been alive for 7 years and we have no full-time staff because the amount of work it takes to do fundraising and things like that is exceptionally challenging, especially when you're working another job and you're trying to do the work that already exists. So I think it's really important to put up barriers for yourself. And I try to help my volunteers do that, even with me, so that they know their limitations. So like they're only allowed to work 10 hours for Care About Climate each week, unless it's like a very special like instance or situation. They're not allowed to, they have to at least spend one day where they're not checking emails or like doing things on the computer. And like we have to do this because Zoom can take over your life and like really creep into everywhere, and you can literally work. I mean, I'm on calls from 9 a.m. till 10 p.m. today. And that's not sustainable. I also only like right now make around $40,000 a year. So like what I'm saying is hard, like I do what I love and that's really hard. And I've been really trying to practice, like, how do I actually set up these barriers? So like, I am trying to make it so that Thursday, Fridays and Wednesdays, I try not to schedule calls in the evening. I was traveling this weekend, so I made an exception because I didn't have calls on Monday, for example. But I'm like really trying to figure out like how do you block out time and think about that. And I don't do it very well, so I try to also really create that culture within my organization. I think others will have more to say about it. I just want to call it out that that's super real and like be careful because it's really easy to get in there. And I just turned 30 like 2 weeks ago, so I'm kind of having this like quarter life crisis or whatever, where I'm like really need to focus on like how do I make this more sustainable. And so that's like my goal for the year, is to like get to a point where I'm at least only working one job, and that's kind of it. And then maybe doing a volunteer thing where I spend less than 10 hours a week outside of work doing stuff, so I can be like sane. But that's not a great answer because I have the problem, which is not great.
Identifying the problem is always the first step though. So you're on your way. I think it's hard for probably everyone at this table struggles with this. You know, it's just like, you gotta, like you said, set your boundaries, figure out where your line is, and understand that it's a marathon, not a sprint, and figure out how to recharge your batteries, you know, in whatever way you need to do that. Alex, it looked like you were unmuted. Do you want to add?
Yeah, I'll just throw in there really quick. Calling back to the last thing that I said about organizational culture shift, I think, you know, a big part of that is, and Natalie, this is different. Like for you, you know, I think the other thing that's interesting is like within the movement, I think there's a big debate between whether or not the work is most valuable as a volunteer-led effort or as like our full-time job, and the, you know, the trade-offs between whether it's, you know, full-time salary, this is my work and this is what, you know, I do in work hours, versus like I have a job and then, you know, this is my volunteer time. So for those of us that are in this is my full-time job, whether it's for-profit or nonprofit, if you're doing work in movement spaces or for justice-oriented work, again, there's this huge conversation happening around organizational culture, around, you know, honoring conversations around capacity and vulnerability, creating space for organizations to have democratic decision-making cultures where teams can honor each other's capacities and choose to slow down projects, choose to redefine deadlines, choose to you know, readjust project proposals. A lot of what happens in burnout spaces is a result of top-down leadership making decisions that then get put off on staff. So, you know, we live in a culture where things are quantitative. We have to report things quantitative, and that incentivizes a push, right? So it's like we have to get a certain number of doors knocked in order to get a certain number of voters out in order to, you know, reach our goals. And so the $50,000 grant that we applied for, that someone at the top applied for, trickles down to pushing our staff and our volunteers to perform in order to meet the demands of the report that we have to provide back to the grantor. Lots of conversations happening in philanthropy about white supremacy culture and quantitative, you know, arguments. So it's a big conversation. It's a challenging one, but my recommendation would be to bulk up on resources that talk about white supremacy culture and talk about, the opportunities for democratically run organizations and opportunities for staff to take the lead on decisions around funding and finance and leadership and project management and capacity, and to be able to really, navigate those things together. I think the way that we work ourselves out of burnout culture is when we all build a system where we honor and support each other.
So true. I think I have a great article on how white supremacy culture shows up in organizations that I'll send to Kendall and Fiona if you want to share it out afterwards. When I read it, I was just like, oh my gosh, everywhere I've ever worked, we all do this. You know what I mean? It's just like, it's like you're swimming in it. Like Ibram X. Kendi says, like you're just swimming in it. You don't even see it. But it is okay to rest. It is okay to recharge. You're a human being. You're not a robot, right? Okay, let's go on to Katie. You've had your hand up for a while. Go ahead, Katie.
Thank you. My question was for Alex. I know you talked a little bit about this with Mikey's question, but I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the process of starting the student organization and kind of like what gave you that push to turn your idea for the organization into a reality.
Yeah, really quick, just because I know we don't have a ton of time, Katie, I'm happy to follow up with you if you want to chat more. I would say one of the first bits of advice that anyone gave me in starting an organization was don't. So, you got to navigate that one. It's a really fascinating space to be in. I think, I would recommend doing a lot of research, talking to a lot of people, being willing to navigate the dynamic of your own internal tenacity to say, I can do this, while also acknowledging kind of the network and, in the business world, they would call this market research, right? Like, what's the market that you're looking to serve? And also who are the actors out there that would be your allies or your competitors? We made the decision to launch after a lot of research to really understand, did we position ourselves well enough within the space to not be encroaching on existing organizations, not competing with people who we'd want to partner with? Were we serving a niche that we felt we could fill that made sense? And for a lot of organizations, I think the best option is to seek fiscal sponsorship. To find an organization that does very similar work to you, that is mission aligned, that you'd fit better underneath, as opposed to creating your own like pre-existing entity. And you can always spin off. So you can always be fiscally sponsored for 2 years, and then if it's really successful and you're ready to go larger, do your own thing. So that would be my initial thought, is just, who else is out there that you can talk to that does work somewhat similar to you, that you can get advice and feedback on first, and also being willing to take that advice and feedback with a grain of salt, because maybe it's worth it to do it anyway.
I think that's really good advice. We work as a community foundation. We're in the business of building nonprofit capacity throughout our 5-county region. And we just did this huge analysis of there's almost 2,000 different nonprofits, most of which are volunteer led and don't have a single FTE, a single full-time employee in our 5-county region. And so we have conversations like, is this too many? Like, shouldn't we just get some of these people in the room working together? Like, why do we have 13 literacy festivals? Why don't we just have 4? So things like that. So trying to figure out cooperation over competition, especially in the social sector, is so critically important. We have time for one more question, Meg.
Yeah, you all, well, thank you so much for coming and speaking. This has been so interesting. You touched on this a little bit, but I kind of wanted to see, a lot of your work is spanning like outside of a state into different communities. Some of you are like international. And we've been seeing a lot of policy, specifically in the United States, like trying to like shut down like the environmental progress that we're making. And so I'm wondering, like, have you faced any big roadblocks that have like prevented you from doing your work, like on a policy standpoint? And like, how do you navigate that?
Natalie or Shannon, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, I can jump in. I would say the largest, so I do voter turnout work, and last year, 2020, was chock full of roadblocks and barriers that kept popping up because voting laws kept changing at a pace faster than anyone had seen before, largely due to COVID and like more people can vote by mail now, but only in a certain way, but only if you're this person. So I won't pretend that there's a simple solution to that. But what I would say is what we try to do is have as much of our work be like puzzle pieces, so that if this part needs to change, we can like replace that with, you know, this different recommendation that we're giving to voters, rather than having to scrap everything. We think about the different contingencies, what's likely to happen, what's not, so that when these roadblocks, especially as a policy change comes up, we don't have to start all over again at the last minute. We're just pivoting rather than like hitting refresh.
Thank you, Shannon. Okay, well, we are about out of time, so I'm going to turn it back over to Fiona to close us out. Thank you so much, everyone, for your time and attention.
Katie, thank you so much for doing an amazing job moderating today's session, and to Natalie and Shannon and Alex for just a great conversation. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Fiona Wilson. I have the honor of being the director of the Sustainability Institute at the University of New Hampshire. And I just wanted to say a few words in closing, just reflecting on today's webinar and what we've heard. We've talked a lot about partnerships and collaboration versus competition. We've talked about how do we all avoid that burnout that comes from being passionate people that care about progressive things, all super important. I think I want to just close though on echoing back to one of Alex's comments about theory of change. So for those of you that haven't heard of that phrase before, theory of change is really the explanation or the sort of causal relationship, if you like, about how the desired change we want to see happen will actually come about in a particular context. And I think we teach theory of change a lot in our programs, and we do that because we really understand that the work of sustainability is really about better understanding the how, right? We all aspire to create change, but really knowing how we will do that is really, and what are the unique contributions that we or our organizations can make is so important. We also really prioritize helping our students learn about the variety of like different modes of creating change, right? Because we know that the challenges of sustainability are too great for one simple solution or one simple intervention, right? We need complex solutions for complex challenges. And so I'm really happy that we could spend some time today talking about community organizing and activism. It's just such a vital part and plays such an important sort of complementing role to those other modes of change. We'll be talking about some of those other modes of change, like how next week we're going to be talking about the role that business, can and is and should play in creating a sustainable future. But there's also other modes of change: public policy, civic engagement, volunteerism, right? We want our sustainability graduates at UNH to really understand all of those modes of change. I really loved hearing some of the things we heard today about activism and community organizing. In particular, this idea of how do we raise up and empower marginalized voices so that they can influence systems of existing power, and how can we help them have their voices heard and make change. I also loved what I heard about connecting otherwise disparate groups of people for this idea of collective impact, right? How can we make a bigger impact together when we're connected and aligned than if we are working independently? I'll also go back to a quote that Alex said, which is a quote I love, which is, no one can do everything, but everyone can do something. So true. But thank you, Katie, Natalie, Shannon, and Alex, for not just doing something, but for doing in your own ways, doing a lot of pretty big influential somethings. You're all doing incredible work out in the community.